This is a podcast from Rover.
Better me.
Better me.
Better me.
Better me.
It's better me. Hopefully. Hello, everybody, and welcome along to this week's episode of Better Me, Hopefully. And I can't believe that I am about to do a podcast episode about menopause. I thought that menopause was just menopause, and it was something that hit you when you were like, I don't know, 65, 70, something like that. And up until then, you just had periods. But then I was watching Grey Areas videos, Petra Vegas' amazing podcast, and she started talking about perimenopause. And I was watching this being like, oh my God, am I perimenopausal? I was 36 at this point, by the way. And I'm like, I get the night sweats. I get that. Oh my God, I get that. And convinced myself that I was perimenopausal. I wasn't, but one thing that blew my mind is that I was 36 years old and I had never even heard of perimenopause. I didn't know that there was another torturous thing for us females to blimmin' live through. And it was interesting. I went around our building here at work to find out how many women actually knew perimenopause existed.
Is it when your hormones are all out of whack?
Perimenopause? No idea.
Kind of.
Did you even know that it was a thing?
Yeah, not really. Like, I feel like we talk about menopause and we know what that is, but I don't think perimenopause is very well known.
Could you explain what perimenopause is?
Like, just before you're about to go through menopause, like the symptoms that you get before it happens? No, yeah, I'm wrong, aren't I?
Menopause before the menopause.
Do you know what age you get it?
Anywhere from mid-30s.
That's the most educated response so far. Do you know what perimenopause is, like, if you had to explain it?
Perimenopause? No. I know what menopause is, I think. My mum gets angry. Is it the same as menopause? Is it to do with your periods, when your periods stop? I should know. It's going to happen to me.
But yet, we were never taught about it.
So when I was asking what episodes people wanted to hear on the podcast, the most common thing that came up was perimenopause. What is it? When do I get it? And then what does that mean with menopause as well? And so we had to do an episode on it, and we found a fantastic expert to talk to. So please welcome to Better Me, hopefully, the wonderful Monica Barnes. Is that your actual background, or is that a green screen?
No, that is a green screen, and it's on Google Meets. I'm thinking that one of my colleagues has put this background on.
It's gorgeous. Monica looks...
I look the same.
You look like you're balling in your big mansion. I love this for you. Monica, thank you so much for doing the podcast. I was quite surprised how many people didn't even know, including myself, what perimenopause is. So could you please explain to us, what is the difference between perimenopause and menopause?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to do this podcast with you today,
it's an honour.
Sharon. So perimenopause is defined as being the time in a woman's life when her ovaries start to reduce down their production of estrogen hormone, and with that a woman's estrogen hormone levels begin to fluctuate, and they're going up and down, and with that she can start to experience any number of the 34 symptoms of menopause. Now, the average age for perimenopause is actually 45, so it's much younger than many women actually think that they can begin to experience menopausal symptoms with, and that's a key barrier to women actually recognising that some of the symptoms that they'll be experiencing are in actual fact menopausal symptoms associated with the hormonal changes. Now, the only difference between perimenopause and menopause for women is in perimenopause, a woman is either still having periods, although as she moves towards menopause, they will become more erratic and irregular. And menopause is actually defined as only being one day in a woman's life. So that is when a woman has experienced 12 consecutive months of no bleeding. And then once you've experienced those 12 consecutive months, everything else after that is considered to be postmenopausal. And for many women, they won't know that actually they've experienced menopause because your periods are erratic beforehand. And also women can go for several months of having no bleeding bleeding, and then unfortunately have a light period or have some spot bleeding, and the clock goes back to day one for counting for those 365 days for menopause.
So do we have to live with this forever? So as soon as we actually have that menopause where like period has stopped and you've had your 12 months of not having any bleeding or anything like that, is it not over? Do I then spend the rest of my life getting hot flushes and all that sort of stuff? Because I am struggling to find when stuff gets better to be a woman, because we are getting all of the shit stuff.
Absolutely. And that's a great question, Sharon. And I think one of the most important key takeaway messages for us as women is understanding what is actually quite a predictable process. So it feels unpredictable for many women going through both perimenopause, menopause, because we just don't understand what's happening to us. But most importantly, that actually it doesn't matter whether or not you're perimenopausal or postmenopausal, Sharon. Wellness is really attainable throughout both perimenopause and menopause. And the key factor in this is women understanding what's happening to them, recognising their symptoms, recognising the impact, and then considering what are the options of evidence-based treatments that support women to feel well during both perimenopause and menopause.
So you said that there were 34 different symptoms of perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah.
What are the most common symptoms that people experience? Obviously, the one I hear the most about is the hot flushes and the sweating, which I already experienced by being on anxiety medication. So I'm looking forward to having more reasons to sweat. But what are the other things that people might not recognise are actually signs of perimenopause or menopause?
Sure, absolutely. Great. And another great question. So like what you said, as women, we tend to think that perimenopause and menopause is about hot flushes and night sweats, and it's about the anger rages and the mood swings. But we actually know it's the psychological symptoms of both perimenopause and menopause that are the most troublesome for women. And we know that actually by the age of 45, that 8 in 10 women will be experiencing these symptoms to some level of severity. Now, what are they? It's the low mood symptoms, but the low mood symptoms are experienced differently to a clinical depression. So it's not the hopelessness or the thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore that women have with depression, but it's women frequently describe it as feeling as though their mood is flat and almost like the joy and vibe that they used to have for life has either lessened or it's gone. It's the anxiety symptoms. And many women, I often say to women that perimenopause often heralds the time when women start to develop this imposter syndrome. And it's almost particularly in relation to work. So many women will have had their jobs and their careers up into the age mid-40s when perimenopause tends to start, and they'll be very confident in their jobs. They'll be very self-assured, and then suddenly the hormonal changes of perimenopause start and women start to really self-doubt their abilities. And that can be particularly at work, but also in relation to things that they've done for years that with ease. So many women will suddenly say, I can't drive at night anymore because I just don't have the same confidence.
Wow.
Or I can't ride my bike that I've done for years because I'm just so anxious and worried that I'm going to fall off of it. So the low mood, the anxiety, irritability is really significant. The mood changes, so feeling overwhelmed by triggers or situations that you didn't feel overwhelmed with before. Another key symptoms is sleeping difficulties. It's probably the top one that women start to experience, and that can often be quite persistent throughout perimenopause and postmenopause, and really unusual symptoms that often aren't identified as being menopausal symptoms. So joint pain, muscle pains, back pain, itchy skin.
Wow.
urinary frequency. So I often say to women, how many of you think that getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom to urinate is a sign of getting older? And 9 out of 10 women will put their hands up and say, absolutely. Yeah. Whereas it's not a sign of getting older, Sharon. It's a sign that your bladder is lacking an estrogen hormone and that you're suffering from perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms.
Wow, that's crazy. So with like all of these, like, I listen to those, I'm like, oh my God, I already experienced some of these. But also, how many, because there's like a wild stat where people go to the GP with these symptoms and it takes multiple times for a GP to actually realize, oh, you're in perimenopause or you're in menopause. What is that stat? And can you tell us a little about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the UK News and Health Menopause Society in 2022 actually gave a statistic that stated that only 3% of all healthcare clinicians globally have had sufficient training in menopause. And so our clinician doctors and nurses in New Zealand are no different, Sharon, to other doctors and nurses in Western countries. So at the moment, there is no training on menopause in any undergraduate medical or nursing programme.
Wow.
The first that a GP is supported with training in New Zealand is when they do their GP training residency programme. That contains 37 core modules. So like one's orthopaedics, one's paediatrics. Of those 37, one is women's health, and that one module is divided into 19 topics.
Holy.
It's horrific. And so the average GP has only been supported with around 40 minutes training in menopause. And so it creates this situation that we have that sadly many women will be experiencing perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. They'll go along to their healthcare providers, their doctors and their nurses and other physios, because the women are going for joint pains or muscle pains or backache, etc., aren't understanding that these symptoms are actually hormonal, related to perimenopause and menopause. And the UK News and Health brought out another statistic that shows that it takes, on average, a woman 7 GP visits to have her symptoms recognised as being hormonal, related to perimenopause or menopause. And sadly, we know that many women will give up in that process because they themselves aren't understanding that. So that's why things like, women understanding what the perimenopause and menopause is, what the 34 symptoms are, and that actually by the age of 45, we know that 8 in 10 women will be experiencing symptoms to some degree is really, really important.
Because there's a worldwide shortage on HRT, which I kind of understand from listening to Petra's podcast, but also from reading the latest Marianne Key's book, just because it was a very big like menopause kind of storyline throughout it and the HRT shortage. Do you think that there is a shortage of this medication to make menopause more manageable because there just isn't enough training? Or do you think that because I guess we live in a man's world, so people just don't understand how much of a priority it is?
Yeah. So there is a worldwide shortage of HRT, and I think that there's different factors that goes into that. I think one of the biggest factors was the damage and the concern that was done by the WHI, a study on HRT 25 years ago that came out and said that HRT use was associated with an increased risk of breast cancer, heart attacks, strokes and blood clots. Now we know that actually, prescribing rates for HRT globally were significantly impacted by that study, and that women and clinicians were understandably concerned about the results from that study, and it really influenced that people were scared to take and prescribe HRT. Now, sadly, because of the damage that was done by that study, and that study has been repeatedly evaluated and been found to have been flawed in many, many ways, but also that the money that went into research in HRT also plummeted, and that HRT development and research has not been appropriately supported and funded, since this time. Now, what's important for women to understand is, so we've got an under-researched and underfunded area. We've also got, thankfully, we're seeing over the last several years much more of an awareness around menopause and an understanding that HRT actually for many women is one of the gold standard treatments for troublesome symptoms, and also a real game changer for women is that we've now got a newer type of hormones that we use in HRT called body identical, Sharon. Now, body identical hormones come from, we call them natural hormones, and we call them natural hormones because they come from yam plants.
Oh, yams, like the little tiny little things that my nanny used to cook. Oh my gosh, I love a good yam. Yams are an underrated vegetable. I'm glad they're getting a shout out on this podcast. It's about time that Better Me hopefully put yams back on the map.
It's like if you've seen Sex and the City movie 2 and Samantha is sitting in the bath of yams trying to eat enough yams to put the estrogen back into herself. But unfortunately, we can't eat enough. No. But the key, important thing about body identical hormones is that they are very safe. And so when we use estrogen hormones, which every woman, if she's using HRT, will need an estrogen hormone replacement, and we use the body identical types, which is found in patches or it's found in gels, so estrogel, that there is no increased risk for breast cancer, heart attacks, strokes or blood clots. Wow. So they are extremely safe. For any woman who still has her uterus or her womb, she will need to have what's known as combined HRT, so she needs a progesterone part to protect the lining of our uterus from abnormal thickening that can happen through HRT that can cause the development of abnormal cells for uterine cancer. So we completely eliminate that risk by giving a progesterone hormone. And in New Zealand, we have a funded type that comes from the body identical type called Utrogestin. And with that, there is no increased risk for breast cancer, heart attacks, strokes, or blood clots. We know that there's no increased risk for breast cancer for up to 5 years of use. And that's only because we just don't have enough data yet to state what the risk is with breast cancer longer term. And we'll have that data in another couple of years. So because it is so safe for the majority of people, the demand for HRT has gone through the roof. Wow. And the manufacturers just can't keep up with the demand from women for HRT.
So Better Me, hopefully, is brought to you by Specsavers. Absolute legends, and I wanted to go in, get my eyes tested and kind of find out, what Specsavers are all about, because if you're going to work with someone, then you want to know what they're all about, I had the OCT test.
I'm just lining you up at the moment. Are you still comfortable at this height?
Sure am.
Excellent. And just looking at the green X now.
Carthigan, the wonderful optometrist here. What was actually happening when I was getting that OCT test? Because it was so fast and so easy.
Yeah, it's the machine does everything on its own, which is really remarkable. You just need someone to monitor. But it's taking a photo of the back of the eye. It's mapping your nerve layer at the back of the eye to pick up eye health conditions. It's also giving us an actual cross-section of the back of the eye and telling us if there's anything in the layers, the different layers. It diagnoses everything from diabetic problems to moles, and it's pretty remarkable. So it's a very, very useful piece of tech. Every store in New Zealand has one, and every person gets the OCT. So it just means that we pick up a lot of things that we didn't used to.
Incredible. So make sure you do come in and get one of those. It was actually very fun. I felt like I was the Terminator when I was getting it done. It was very fun. I highly recommend. So get into Specsavers and give that a go. Do you feel like listening to all of that and listening to everything you've said so far, it's quite obvious if this was a man problem. I know that men listening to this will probably eye roll and be like, oh, everything's a sexism thing. But I feel like if men needed HRT, they would like, we need more HRT, we need more printers, we need more yams, and they would be on it. Do you feel like, as somebody that's, on the front line of women's health, do you feel like the care and attention in women's health is getting better, worse, or the same?
I would say it's the same, Sharon, to be honest. I think there's an increased awareness around it and women are talking about it more. But in terms of focus and spending and advancements, I think it's the same. And that goes for all of women's health, not just menopause. So it is an area that has been chronically under-researched and underfunded. And, I do agree with you that actually if this was a male problem, that it's highly likely that it would have had much more money and much more funding and much more solutions having been put into it.
It's interesting because like just having this conversation, all these, because of the way my brain works, it just spiders off into like different things. And I'm like, wow, if this is what women are struggling with, imagine what trans people are struggling with when it comes to like hormones and health and all that sort of stuff as well. And it must just get worse and worse. And there's all the stats about, Māori Pacifica women, or like over in the States that African American women are too scared to go to the hospital and things like that. It blows my mind that this hasn't become a bigger issue. And I think it's really cool to see, people like you out there doing the work that you're doing. I really like seeing all of the podcasts like with Petra and stuff like that, of people finally kind of having these conversations. Because otherwise I would have started going through perimenopause and had absolutely no idea what it was, because we did not learn about that in health class at school. Like, we heard it, they brushed over menopause. And like the sex education was a joke as well. But the fact that like all of these young girls don't even really understand what's going to happen to their body, yet we know not to open a condom in the dark, is quite wild. Like, I remember being in health class and like, okay, girls, so you're going to get your period, and you're like, okay, cool. And you're like, this thing called menopause, it's for old people. It's basically when your period stops. Now, remember, do we open a condom with our teeth in the dark? And it was like, and they're like, no, because you could get pregnant. And the fact that it's like, okay, I think the don't open a condom with your teeth in the dark thing was probably, more of the throwaway than the menopause being a throwaway. Like, even, because when else are we going to learn about it?
Absolutely.
If not in health class at high school.
Absolutely. And one of the key issues, I think, is that, healthcare clinicians themselves, it's not that they don't want to support women with this, because we do. It's just that we've not been supported with the right training, right, to be able to understand this. And I think, it was only, I'd had many, many years of nursing, primarily in mental health nursing, Sharon.
Jeez, another under-resourced area.
And so was well versed in terms of treatment of depression and anxiety and mood swings and that related to depression or anxiety or stress disorders, etc. And it wasn't until I started to have my own journey throughout perimenopause, had absolutely no idea what was happening to me, but psychologically felt really unwell. And I was doing depression and anxiety rating scales on myself, knowing I didn't feel depressed and I'd never been an anxious person, but suddenly I was really anxious and my confidence was in my boots. Saying to my psychiatrist colleagues, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't feel depressed and I don't feel anxious, but I can't figure this out. I'm not sleeping well, again, can be a really common symptom associated with depression or anxiety, no energy, just lost that kind of joy and vibe that I used to have for life. And then suddenly having lots of physical symptoms and absolutely no idea. And my light bulb moment came from a discussion with a friend of mine in the UK. Right. And I was talking to her about how much I was struggling. And she had watched a daytime TV programme in the UK that had someone on it talking about perimenopause. And she said, do you think this might be what you're going through? And at the time, I had thought about menopause, Sharon, but I thought it can't be because I'm only 43 and I'm still having periods. And so I'm not 50 yet.
Yeah.
So it can't be menopause. That's exactly what I thought. This cannot be menopause. So I just disregarded it. And it wasn't until that conversation with my friend, I went away and then looked up perimenopause and thought this exactly accounts for some of what I am going through. And then I've got a great GP, Sharon. I'm really lucky.
Oh, good.
And had a conversation with my GP, and she said, I don't know anything about perimenopause either, Monica. So you'll need to go on a waiting list for a private clinic. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But the waiting list was like 8 months to be seen. And that was then when I was really fortunate that being a nurse, a registered nurse, that I thought, actually, I can go and do my specialist menopause training through the UK News and Health Menopause Society to see what I need to do to help myself through this. So when I did my training, it wasn't to support women from a nursing perspective. It was to support myself through this journey and understand what was happening to me and what I needed to do. And that's when I then learned about the massive gap that exists and just how prevalent this is. And one of the horrifying things for me now as a clinician is that I sit there and I think, I'd worked more than 25 years in mental health services across inpatient units, community mental health teams, outpatient units, and not once in all of those years had I sat around the table with my colleagues and we had ever once thought, what age is this woman? Could these psychological symptoms be related to perimenopause and menopause? And what I now know is that 8 in 10 women from the age of 45 will be experiencing these psychological symptoms to some degree. Of that 8 in 10, 20% will have mild symptoms, 60% will have moderate, and 20% will have severe. And yet we've no understanding that these psychological symptoms are actually related to estrogen, and that antidepressant medication and psychiatric medications just don't work for them because they increase the wrong hormone.
Isn't that incredible? We look at how overloaded and under-resourced our mental health system is. We look at how average our women's health system is. But if people were educated on both, they would kind of go hand in hand, where the women were getting more support, it would free up more of the mental health system. And it's just like such an obvious thing. But in closing, Monica, because we don't have daytime talk shows anymore, RIP to the great shows that were Ricky Lake and Sally Jeffsey Raphael. Shout out to all of my early 2000 girlies who get me. But what would your advice be for someone listening to this podcast right now that they can do or be aware of in their 30s, maybe early 40s, about perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah. So the main key takeaway message is I think about our ovaries, which produces the majority of our estrogen hormone, as being on this genetic pre-programmed timer switch. And that's a non-clinical way to think about them. But actually, they're genetically designed that when we get into our early to mid-40s, they will start to reduce down their supply of estrogen hormone. And with that, women can start to experience any number of the 34 symptoms of menopause. So women educating themselves and understanding that actually that is a process that every woman will go through if she lives to that age, that actually understanding the 34 symptoms and beginning to recognise that at the start in perimenopause, these symptoms are coming and going. They're coming and going because your hormone levels are fluctuating. But that doesn't mean to say that actually you can't be supported with effective menopause treatment at that time, because you can be. So recognising what the symptoms are, understanding what's going to happen to you, and then if it's impacting your normal level of functioning, and it's impacting how you feel in terms of your own wellness, you don't need to suffer. That's exactly the time that you need to reach out to actually be able to explore what treatments can help you. And we've got a wide variety of treatments. We've got lifestyle, we've got non-hormonal, and we've got hormonal treatments that are all really safe and really effective that support women during perimenopause, menopause, and beyond.
Oh, you are absolutely amazing, Monica. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We really appreciate it. And I feel like I've learned so much, and I feel way more reassured about what my body is inevitably going to go through. So thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And we'll put in the show notes a link to like more information and stuff like that as well. But thank you so much.
That's all right. You're more than welcome, Sharon.
Oh,
nice to speak with you today.
Nice to speak with you. Thank you. I feel like I'm going to have to listen to this podcast a couple of times to just really let all the information sink in. And I'm not just saying that because I want to get clicks on my podcast, but genuinely, there's just so many different elements, and I just cannot believe that I have spent my whole life not knowing that perimenopause even existed. If I didn't follow Petra on Instagram, I would never probably have learned about it, because if it wasn't for that video, I wouldn't even have Googled it or investigated what it was. And the fact that so many of you were asking, when I asked what episodes you wanted to learn about perimenopause because you didn't know what it was, just goes to show how fucked it is for women in the women's health sector. To all of the superstars that are working in that area, people like Monica that are out there trying to fight to get the information out there to people, we salute you and absolutely appreciate you. So listen to this episode, and genuinely not because I want to get people to listen to the podcast, but because the information is in this podcast, share it with your female friends that may not know about perimenopause or what their body is about to go to. If you send it to them and they're like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, I already know about that, that's fine. But if they didn't, every woman needs to know what we're about to go through, because we have not been educated well enough on this topic. Thank you so much for listening. We really, really appreciate it. I know I say that every week, but genuinely, I really, really do. Don't want to say thank you again because I sound like a real creep, but thanks. See you next week. You look hot today, by the way.
Rover. Music, radio, podcasts.